Keanu Reeves had everything: fame, respect, and loyalty. But one haunting question wouldn't let him sleep. Would anyone care if he disappeared? So, he did the unthinkable. He faked being seriously ill to find out the truth. What his employees did next, it shattered him and changed everything. But that wasn't the biggest shock. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sky over Los Angeles was a sheet of slate gray, heavy with the threat of rain. Inside a quiet brick building tucked away in the Arts District, Keanu Reeves sat alone in his office, staring out at the storm clouds rolling in. The hum of the city seemed distant here, muffled by the thick studio walls and the thick fog in his own mind. His desk, usually a mess of screenplays, sketches, and coffee mugs, was strangely clean today. The only thing in front of him was a framed photo of his production team. Smiling faces that had stood beside him for years. He had just returned from a charity gala downtown. The event had been a success. Hundreds of people showed up, fans, donors, organizers. They all thanked him profusely. Smiles, handshakes, speeches. One woman cried as she thanked him for funding her son's short film. A young boy with autism hugged him after watching his latest production. And yet, as the applause echoed in his ears, something inside him stayed silent. It wasn't emptiness exactly. It was doubt, the kind that crept in slowly, like the first cold breeze before a storm. Grace Navarro knocked gently before entering his office. She had worked as his assistant for nearly 5 years. Sharp, kind, and unshakably loyal, Grace knew Keanu better than anyone at the studio. She held a tray with a white ceramic teapot and 2 small cups, steam rising in gentle curls. "You didn't touch your dinner," she said, setting the tray down, "so I thought I'd try jasmine. It's calming." Keanu blinked as if waking from a dream. He turned from the window, offering a faint smile. "Thanks, Grace." She poured him a cup and handed it over. The scent filled the room. It was comforting, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Rough night?" she asked, her voice soft. "No," he said. "It was fine. The event was beautiful." "You bet." Keanu took a sip of tea. It warmed his throat, but not the cold place in his chest. He set the cup down and leaned back in his chair. "Do you think they'd care if I disappeared?" he asked suddenly. Grace tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, "not just noticed. I know people would notice, but would they actually care? Not because I'm famous, not because I'm the boss, just because I'm me." Grace didn't answer right away. She sat across from him, her eyes narrowing in concern. "Is this about the board meeting last week?" she asked. "Or something someone said?" Keanu shook his head. "It's not one thing. It's just something I've been feeling lately. I have this amazing team, talented, kind people, but sometimes I wonder if I'd matter to them if I wasn't who I am. If I didn't sign the paychecks, if I didn't show up in movies, if I were just a guy in the room." Grace reached for her tea, quiet for a moment. Then she looked him in the eye. "Keanu, I've worked with a lot of people in this business. Most don't care if you exist beyond what you can offer, but you're different. People stay because they want to, because you make this place feel safe." Keanu looked back at the photo on his desk. For a second, he wanted to believe her. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but how can I be sure?" Grace set her cup down and leaned forward slightly, her brow creased with worry. "You really don't believe they care?" she asked. Keanu rubbed his hands together slowly. "I think they respect me. I think they're grateful for the opportunities. But that's not the same thing, is it? It's easy to be nice to the person who pays your bills, but would any of them come looking for me if I vanished? Would they worry about the man, not the job I represent?" Grace hesitated. "I would." He looked at her, eyes steady. "Would you really? Or would you miss the structure I provide, the access, the way I protect everyone from chaos?" Her shoulders dropped, stung by the question, but instead of getting defensive, she responded with something quieter. "I'd miss you because you're the only person who noticed when I cried in the parking lot 3 years ago. Because you bought my brother a plane ticket when he couldn't afford to visit his dying wife. You never told anyone about that, not even me. I had to find out from my brother." Keanu looked down, ashamed and humbled. "I wasn't trying to get credit." "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." The rain finally started, pattering gently against the large office windows. Grace watched it for a second, then stood. "I'm going to grab some scripts from the print room. Try to get some sleep, okay?" He nodded, but his expression didn't change. As soon as the door closed behind her, Keanu reached for his phone. His hand hovered over the screen. He scrolled through his contacts until he found a familiar name. Dr. Isaac Calder, old friend, college roommate, one of the few people who'd seen him break down in the worst moments of his life. Isaac was now a neurologist and someone Keanu trusted completely. He stared at the name for a moment, thumb hesitating. Then, with a sigh, he tapped call. Isaac picked up quickly. "Keanu, what's up? You okay?" There was a pause before Keanu spoke. "I need a favor." There was movement on the other end of the line, some rustling, then Isaac's voice again. "You sound serious." "I am. I need to disappear for a few days. Not from the world, but from my work. I want you to help me fake something." Isaac chuckled nervously. "Okay, wow. I wasn't expecting that." "Fake what, exactly?" "A medical condition," Keanu said. "Something believable. Something that sounds serious but won't scare anyone too much. I want people to think I'm sick." The other end went quiet. "I need to know something, Isaac," Keanu continued. "I need to know if the people around me care about me. Not my name, not my reputation, just me." Isaac let out a slow breath. "Keanu, this sounds risky. Emotionally, legally, and for you? You hate lying." "I know," he said. "But I need the truth more than I need comfort right now." There was another pause. Then Isaac said quietly, "You really think they wouldn't care otherwise?" Keanu's voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what to think anymore." Isaac didn't answer right away. Keanu could hear him pacing on the other end of the line, muttering softly under his breath. Finally, his voice returned, lower, more serious than before. "All right, if we're going to do this, we do it carefully. You'll need a plausible diagnosis, something non-contagious, something that sounds real, but won't require too many fake details. Something like autoimmune encephalitis. It affects memory, fatigue levels, and sometimes mobility. Not fatal, but definitely serious." Keanu nodded slowly. "That sounds right. Something that forces people to think." "Are you sure this is what you want?" Isaac asked. "You're putting a lot on the line." "I'm already carrying a lot," Keanu replied. "I just want to know who would still show up if they thought I had nothing left to give." Isaac sighed. "You'll have to disappear for a bit. Hospital, maybe a few days. You'll need to act weak, distant, like it's draining you. You can't talk about this to anyone, not Grace, not even your closest team." "I understand," Keanu said. "Can you call Grace tomorrow and tell her I've been admitted?" There was a pause. "She's going to be devastated." "I know. That's what scares me the most." Keanu hung up and sat back in his chair. The office felt even quieter than before. He looked again at the framed photo on his desk. Smiling faces. People who had laughed with him, worked late into the night beside him, stood by him during hard projects and impossible deadlines. But in his heart, he didn't know if any of that was real, or if they were just staying close to the sun. The rain hit harder now, streaking down the windows in long, silvery lines. He turned off the lights, letting the gray darkness take over the room. In the reflection of the window, he could see his own face. Tired, older than he remembered, lonelier than he wanted to admit. He stood, walked slowly to the door and stepped into the hallway, where Grace's office light was still on. He paused, about to say something, but then thought better of it. She deserved a genuine answer, not another question he didn't know how to ask. Without a word, he turned and walked out into the rain. Tomorrow, everything would begin. Dr. Isaac Calder stood in his kitchen early the next morning, phone in one hand and coffee in the other, staring out at the soft morning light. Keanu's voice from the night before still echoed in his head. He had never heard him sound like that. Tired, uncertain, almost hollow. As a neurologist, Isaac had seen patients crumble under the weight of invisible illnesses. But Keanu's pain wasn't physical. It was something deeper, the kind of loneliness that can grow even in a room full of applause. He picked up his phone again and typed out a message. Diagnosis finalized, chronic autoimmune encephalitis. Will explain symptoms in team call. Private suite secured under alias. Start today? The reply came instantly. Yes, let's begin. At 9:00 a.m., Isaac arrived at St. Albans, a quiet private hospital tucked behind a row of palm trees near Beverly Hills. The hospital had a VIP wing used mostly by celebrities who wanted peace. Keanu had used it once before after a minor motorcycle accident and trusted its discretion. They checked him in under the name William Arden, a temporary alias chosen because it meant nothing. Just a name, no attachments. Inside his room, Keanu sat quietly while nurses hooked up non-invasive monitoring devices and pretended to start IV treatments. They were in on it. Briefed by Dr. Calder personally, no official records would be created. It was a performance, one meant to simulate fatigue, weakness, and instability. Calder stood by the window, arms crossed. "You sure you're ready?" Keanu nodded. "Just make the call." Back at the studio, Grace arrived to an empty office. No Keanu. No texts. No tea order. No scripts on the desk. At first, she assumed he was running late, but by 10 o'clock, she began pacing. Her calls went straight to voicemail. His housekeeper hadn't seen him. She started opening his calendar, looking for clues. At 10:22 a.m., her office phone rang. Grace Navarro. "This is Dr. Isaac Calder. I'm a close friend of Keanu's. I'm calling with difficult news." She froze. "What happened?" "Keanu was admitted to St. Albans early this morning. He came to see me after experiencing significant cognitive fatigue, disorientation, and persistent headaches. We ran some tests, and he's been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. Chronic autoimmune encephalitis." Grace sat down slowly, her hand gripping the arm of her chair. "Is it life-threatening?" "We don't believe so," Isaac said, gently. "But it is serious. He's extremely weak, and we're going to keep him under close supervision. He may be in the hospital for at least a week, possibly more. I'm calling you because he asked me to." She blinked back tears. "Did he say anything else?" "Yes. He said you'd know who to contact. He wants you to continue leading the studio while he rests." Her breath caught. "Okay. Yes, I'll handle it." Isaac paused. "He also said to tell you that he trusts you." Grace hung up the phone and stared at the wall, her thoughts racing. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her notepad. She scribbled down the doctor's name, the hospital, and the diagnosis, though the words barely registered. The name of the condition? Autoimmune encephalitis. Sounded terrifying. She didn't know what it meant exactly, but the way the doctor spoke made it clear. This wasn't just a cold. It wasn't something Keanu could walk off with, rest and tea. It was serious. And he had kept it hidden until now. She stood up and walked to his office. It felt wrong opening the door without knocking. The room was still. His chair was empty. The familiar smell of sandalwood and old paper hung in the air. A half-read script sat on the edge of the desk. The mug he always used for tea was still there, the faint outline of yesterday's leaves at the bottom. Grace's chest tightened. Keanu had been off lately, quieter, more distant. She thought he was just tired from long shoots and late nights at charity events. But now it all made sense. The blank stares, the moments he looked like he was about to say something but didn't. He had been battling something inside and didn't tell anyone. Not even her. She went back to her office, picked up the phone, and began making calls. One by one, she notified the senior team: Danny from cinematography, Carla in post, Leo the composer, Elijah, Ron, Natalia, and Marisol. Everyone had the same response: shock, confusion, concern. Keanu wasn't just their boss, he was the heart of the studio. Every person had their own story of how he'd gone out of his way to support them, encourage them, protect them. By the time the last call ended, Grace had tears running down her face. She wiped them quickly, took a deep breath, and opened her laptop. She drafted a message to the rest of the staff. Dear team, many of you have worked with Keanu for years and know how much he gives of himself to this studio and all of us. I'm writing to share that Keanu has been diagnosed with a serious medical condition and will be stepping away temporarily to rest and receive care. We don't know how long he'll be gone, but he asks that we keep moving forward. We'll honor him by doing just that. I'll be coordinating all studio operations until further notice. Please reach out to me with anything you need. Let's support each other and him through this. With love, Grace Navarro. She hit send and closed her eyes. The tears came harder this time. At St. Alden's, Keanu sat propped up against two pillows, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines that weren't actually doing anything. A nurse had dimmed the lights and placed a warm blanket over him, just like they would for any other patient. But none of this was real. Not the IV, not the diagnosis, not even the hospital band on his wrist. What was real was the ache growing in his chest. He opened his phone and read Grace's message to the team. She had forwarded it to his private number without realizing he'd already seen it through a mirrored inbox. Her tone was calm, steady, even loving. But beneath the words, Keanu could hear the panic. He imagined her pacing, taking care of everyone else, while ignoring the storm forming inside her. She'd always been that way. Isaac entered the room quietly, holding a tablet. The press hasn't caught wind of anything. Your privacy's secure. I've spoken with the hospital staff. They're playing along. Keanu gave a weak nod. Thanks. Isaac pulled up a chair. Grace took the call better than I expected, but I could hear it in her voice. She's scared. She's probably exhausted already, Keanu said. She'll try to carry everything herself. Maybe you should have told her the truth. That would ruin the point, Keanu replied softly. She's the one I need to see most. Isaac watched him for a moment. You want her to prove something to you. But what if she already has? Keanu didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Grace sat in the main conference room, going through production schedules. Her eyes were blurry from reading, and her inbox had exploded. Everyone was offering help, ideas, questions. Some wanted to pause productions. Others wanted to send flowers. The entire building felt like it had been hit with grief. She picked up her phone and stared at Keanu's contact. She typed a message. I miss you already. Rest. Don't worry about anything. We've got it. Then she deleted it. Instead, she sat in silence for a moment, hands trembling, before opening a blank page on her laptop. She began making lists. People to update, projects to delegate, upcoming shoots, vendor contracts. And just beneath that, she added one more section. Things Keanu never asked for but always did anyway. That list grew fastest. By sundown, she was still working. Lights flickered off in other parts of the studio, but her office stayed bright. Outside, the city lights blinked on as the sky turned dark. Back in the hospital, Keanu closed his eyes. He didn't know if anyone would visit tomorrow. He didn't know who would check in without needing something. But he was about to find out. The next morning, Grace arrived at the studio before the sun was fully up. The hallway lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows on the floor. Keanu's absence lingered like a ghost, quiet, cold, and unshakable. Every corner of the building felt off balance. The coffee machine was too quiet. The air in his office hadn't moved. Even the photos on the walls seemed dimmer without him around to smile at them as he passed. By 7:00 IEM, her inbox was overflowing with questions. What did the diagnosis mean? Who would oversee script approvals? Was Keanu coming back at all? She didn't have half the answers. Her job had always been to support Keanu, not replace him. But now, without warning, that was exactly what she was being asked to do. At 9:00 AM, Dr. Isaac Calder arrived at the studio for a staff meeting Keanu had arranged before the plan began. Grace had barely slept. She wore yesterday's clothes, hair pulled into a knot, eyes red behind her glasses. Still, she greeted him with professional calm, hiding the storm inside. The 8 core team members gathered slowly in the conference room. Danny, the passionate cinematographer, sat down first, eyes darting nervously. Carla, the meticulous editor, brought her laptop but didn't open it. Leo, the quiet composer, walked in holding a notebook filled with half-written melodies. Young actor Avery, barely 20, had no idea what to expect and kept fidgeting with his phone. Ron, the sturdy facilities manager, with grease-stained hands, stood by the window. Natalia, the studio cook, wiped flour from her apron, her face pale. Marisol, the receptionist, clutched a tissue already wet, and Elijah, the organized project manager, had 3 folders in his arms and a deep crease between his brows. Ray stood at the head of the table, but she couldn't speak. Instead, she nodded to Dr. Calder. He took a breath. "Thank you all for being here. I know this is sudden." "What's going on?" Danny asked, his voice sharp. "Why is Keanu in a hospital?" Isaac looked around the room. Keanu was diagnosed yesterday morning with a neurological autoimmune condition, chronic autoimmune encephalitis. It's serious, it's unpredictable. He's experiencing extreme fatigue and memory disruption. He'll be out for at least a few weeks. The room went still. Natalia dropped her coffee cup. It rolled across the table and onto the floor. "No," Carla whispered. Leo put his hand over his mouth. Denny's face crumpled, and without warning, he started crying. Silent, gut-wrenching tears. Grace closed her eyes. She hadn't cried since yesterday, but now she couldn't hold it back. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment longer. Then Ron, who rarely spoke unless something was broken, stepped forward from the window and asked in a low voice, "Is he going to make it?" Dr. Calder hesitated before answering. "The condition isn't fatal, but it's serious. He's being closely monitored. The important thing right now is rest and limited stress. That's why he's stepped away from the studio entirely." Natalia stood up suddenly, grabbing her bag. "I'm going to the kitchen," she said. "He always asks for lentil soup when he's sick. I'm making a batch and sending it over." Carla looked over, wiping her eyes. "We should do something as a team. A care package, notes, pictures, something to let him know we're here." "I'll help organize it," Marisol said softly. "We can each write a letter." Leo opened his notebook and flipped to a blank page. "I can write something, too. Not a letter, a song. Just a short piece. Maybe it'll help." Avery finally spoke. "I don't know what to do. I've only been here a few months. He always made me feel welcome, like I wasn't just another actor. I want to help, but I don't know how." Elijah, who had been sitting stiff and still the entire time, opened one of the folders he'd brought with him. "The studio's schedule is stacked for the next 6 weeks. Film shoots, budget approvals, vendor negotiations, media calls. Keanu was the final sign-off on all of it." Grace nodded. "I know. That's why we're going to divide the responsibilities." "Who's in charge of creative approvals now?" Carla asked. "Who makes those calls?" "I'll coordinate the day-to-day," Grace said. "But I'll need all of you to step up. No one person can replace him. We're going to get through this by working together." Denny finally wiped his eyes. He's always told us we were more than just a team, that we were a family. I want to prove that's true." Natalia returned briefly from the kitchen, cheeks flushed. "The soup's on. I'll have it delivered by lunch." "Should we tell the public?" Leo asked. "The fans? The press?" "No," Grace said firmly. "Not yet. He asked for privacy. We're going to respect that." She looked at each of them. "This is hard. It's going to stay hard for a while. But Keanu gave everything to this place. Now we give back. Not because we have to, because we want to." Elijah slowly closed his folder. "Then let's get to work." Grace stayed long after the meeting ended. She sat alone in the dim conference room, surrounded by empty chairs and the smell of Natalia's cooking drifting faintly through the air vents. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard, her laptop open in front of her, the cursor blinking in a half-finished email to a producer waiting for Keanu's feedback. She didn't have the answers, but she knew she had to give something, anything that kept things from falling apart. Outside her window, the afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the studio courtyard. She could see Ron out there, sweeping up leaves near the fountain that Keanu insisted be installed as a space for quiet thought. Ron wasn't a sentimental man, but today he moved slower, more deliberately, as if each motion had weight. Grace's phone buzzed beside her, a text from Marisol. Elijah set up a shared drive for the care package. People are already uploading messages. Some are really beautiful. Grace replied with a simple heart emoji, then turned back to her screen. She glanced at Keanu's empty chair across the room. It was still slightly turned to the left, just the way he liked it, angled so he could see both the whiteboard and the window. The room felt hollow without his presence, as if the air itself refused to settle without him in it. Back in the editing suite, Carla sat hunched over her desk, but she wasn't touching the film timeline. Instead, she had opened a folder titled Keanu Moments. It was a loose collection of behind-the-scenes clips, laughter caught between takes, quick shots of Keanu helping set up props, or wiping down a rain-soaked lens with his own scarf. She remembered one day when he spent 4 hours moving lights for a new intern, who was too scared to ask for help. He hadn't said a word about it, just smiled and moved cables. Carla clicked on a clip labeled March 3rd Rooftop Shoot. The video opened to Keanu under golden hour light, arms outstretched, yelling, "This is why we do it!" as the wind rushed through his hair. The crew's laughter echoed around him. Carla hit pause, leaned back, and covered her mouth with both hands. He was so alive in that moment, so present, and now he was just gone. Not forever, but gone enough to break something inside her. Meanwhile, Elijah had taken control of the scheduling board. He was trying to keep everything on track, pre-production meetings, location checks, equipment rentals, but every time someone asked, "Should we wait for Keanu's input?" he flinched. He couldn't say what he wanted to say, which was, "Yes, of course, because none of us are Keanu." But he knew that answer would stop everything, and they had to move forward. Avery wandered the back hallway, the script for his upcoming role in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He kept reading the same line over and over, but nothing stuck. His mind kept drifting back to Keanu's words during his audition. "You're not here to impress me. You're here to share yourself." No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever cared that he had something real to offer. Natalia finished the soup and boxed it up in 3 separate containers. She included a small, handwritten note. "You've fed our spirits every day. Let me feed yours." Grace sat on the couch in the lobby that evening, watching the last of the team trickle out, offering them tired smiles and quick nods. She didn't leave, not even when the lights shut off one section at a time. She curled up with a stack of folders and pulled a blanket from the storage closet. She didn't intend to fall asleep, but she did. Right there on the couch. Keanu always said the studio should feel like home. Now Grace was living in it, without him. The morning after the meeting, the studio pulsed with a strange kind of energy. Not the usual buzz of production or problem solving, but something softer, something sacred. People moved with more care, voices lowered. Laughter, when it came, felt half-forced, but it was what people did that mattered now. Carla, still raw from her emotional breakdown in the editing suite, made a quiet decision. She dug through 2 years' worth of behind-the-scenes footage she had personally archived, the moments most people forgot even existed. Keanu helping load props into a truck, Keanu laughing when a camera tipped and fell into a puddle, Keanu hugging an actor after their first scene. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing, she simply started editing. She layered each clip with subtle music, natural sounds, and occasional black screen transitions that read only, "He never asked to be noticed, but we noticed." It became a living tribute, one that reflected everything they couldn't put into words. By late evening, she had a 6-minute video that brought her to tears again just watching it. Meanwhile, Leo stayed locked in the small recording booth behind Studio B. No one disturbed him. Everyone heard the faint notes of a piano drifting through the halls, melodies he hadn't played in years. Leo hadn't composed anything since his father passed. He'd told Keanu once that music died for him the day he left home. Keanu didn't push him, just told him, "It'll come back when it needs to." That morning, it came back. He worked straight through lunch, laying down a haunting, gentle piano piece full of echoes and spaces. It was the sound of someone remembering love. He called it Interlude for Kay. He didn't show it to anyone. Not yet. He planned to attach it to Carla's video, like a letter only music could write. In the workshop behind the kitchen, Ron had taken it upon himself to fix everything. Every loose doorknob, every flickering light, every missing screw. He scrubbed the break room until the grout lines gleamed, then began oiling the hinges in the stairwells. When Grace asked him why he was working so hard, he simply said, he'd want it spotless. That's what he deserves. Ron, who never used the word deserve lightly, didn't say anything else. At the front desk, Marisol printed out a fresh quote each morning and taped it to Keanu's door. Today's said, "The smallest act of kindness is worth more than the grandest intention." She didn't know if he'd ever see it. Back in her corner office, Grace found herself journaling. It started with a simple note meant to organize her thoughts, but soon the words poured out like confession. Each entry began with "Dear Kay," though she never planned to send them. Writing was the only way she could stay tethered to him. In one entry, she wrote, "You always said we were building more than films. We were building a family. But today, I feel like the house is missing its walls. Everyone's trying so hard. They miss you. I miss you. And I'm scared, Keanu. I don't know if we're enough without you. I don't even know if I'm enough." She'd cry after writing, dry her face, and then head straight into meetings. No one saw the cracks, or maybe they did, but no one said a word. By the third day, the emotional gravity had turned the studio into a sacred space. Elijah took over logistics entirely. He printed schedules, delegated tasks, and checked in with each person, quietly, respectfully. He brought Carla her favorite tea, refilled Leo's water bottle, and called Ron's wife to let her know he was working overtime. Elijah had always been efficient, but now he was present. Avery took a different approach. He started talking to the walls. Literally. Every day after lunch, he walked the hallways pretending Keanu was still there. He'd reenact full conversations, asking questions, answering them, even laughing like they were on set. It should have looked strange, but no one stopped him. One afternoon, he passed Grace and said, "He'd tell you to stop carrying it all alone." She froze. He added, "And then he'd offer to take out the trash himself." That night, Grace stood in the kitchen and took out 3 overstuffed garbage bags by hand, just because. Meanwhile, Natalia had taken her cooking to an entirely new level. She was preparing meals as if Keanu would walk in at any moment. Grilled salmon with rosemary, jasmine rice with roasted almonds, fresh carrot cake. She left them packed and labeled in the staff fridge each day. In case he comes back today, she'd say, but she knew he wouldn't. Not yet. Still, she kept cooking. Dr. Calder quietly encouraged the team to send video messages to Keanu. Short, heartfelt updates. No pressure, just speak from the heart. He told them he'd make sure Keanu received them. And Keanu did. Every night, in the private suite hidden behind the hospital's executive wing, Keanu sat alone with a tablet and headphones, heart pounding before he pressed play. The first message was from Danny. Danny stood on the studio rooftop, the skyline of Los Angeles behind him, face flushed and eyes still swollen. "Hey man, I don't know what this is or what you're going through, but it hurts. Not having you around, it's like trying to make a movie without a camera. I miss you. We all do." Next came Carla. She sat cross-legged on the editing floor. "I made something. It's just clips, but it's you, the way we see you. Not the actor, just you. I hope it reminds you how much you matter." Then Leo. He didn't speak. He played the piano. Slow, reverent notes. When it ended, he looked up and said softly, "Come back soon, Keanu. The music needs you." Natalia appeared next. "I left the carrot cake in the fridge. I used fresh cinnamon. Don't make me waste it." Even Avery sent one. He was holding a script. "I memorized it, finally. The part you said was written for someone brave. I'm trying. You make me want to be that person." Keanu's eyes welled up. He covered his face. Each message cracked something open inside him. Grace was the kind of person who noticed patterns. It came from years of managing Keanu's schedule, coordinating studio logistics, and balancing creative chaos with quiet precision. But lately the patterns weren't adding up. And that was the first red flag. It started with the doctor's updates. Dr. Calder had been giving her daily summaries, always at the same time, 8:45 a.m. sharp. At first they were detailed, filled with specific phrases about immune response, cognitive inflammation, and symptom progression. But recently the updates felt copied, rehearsed, almost like they were being pulled from a script. Then, 2 nights ago, while searching for a contract in the shared office computer, Grace came across something she hadn't expected. A phone log from the studio's VoIP call system. She hadn't meant to snoop. She was simply cross-referencing a call with a supplier. But one entry caught her eye. A 12-minute call from Dr. Calder's number to a restricted line labeled Private Client. The timestamp? Just 3 minutes after their last update. Grace stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the mouse. Her heart raced. Something wasn't right. She clicked deeper and found another call. Same doctor, same number. This one was longer. 27 minutes. And it happened right after she'd told Calder she was too overwhelmed to speak and needed to email instead. Why would a doctor call a private number during work hours? Unless that number belonged to someone he wasn't supposed to be contacting. She knew it in her gut. Keanu. Still, she said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she began observing more closely, listening to Calder's tone, watching how often he repeated himself, and something else. He kept referring to Keanu's vitals as stable, but never elaborated. No mention of treatment plans, no real clarity on next steps, just vague comfort. Grace didn't want to believe it, but the cracks were widening fast. Meanwhile, across the city in his private hospital suite, Keanu sat on the edge of his bed with packages stacked around him like a fortress. One by one, letters had begun to arrive. Handwritten envelopes, padded parcels, tightly rolled posters with personal messages scrawled across the back. At first, he thought it was a fluke, 1 or 2 old friends maybe. But now, it was hundreds. From former co-stars, grips, set designers, makeup artists, wardrobe assistants. People he hadn't seen in years. People who wrote things like, "You gave me my first chance," and "You helped me pay my mom's rent," or "I never forgot the way you treated my dad when he visited set." The kindness was overwhelming, and so was the guilt. Keanu sat in silence, surrounded by evidence that he was deeply loved. The guilt gnawed at him harder with each letter he opened. Some were funny, filled with inside jokes from films shot decades ago. Others were painfully sincere. One came from a former background actor he barely remembered, thanking him for buying her daughter a new wheelchair after overhearing a quiet conversation on set. She had never told anyone, until now. He ran his hand through his hair and leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. The phone on the nightstand buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sandra, his co-star from long ago. "Heard what happened. Don't need a reply. Just know I'm praying for you, Kay. And if you ever want to talk, I'm here." He stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then he typed, "Thank you. I'm okay," and deleted it. He picked up a legal pad and began to write. The words came slowly, but they came. "To everyone I've deceived." Then he scratched it out. New page. "This wasn't meant to hurt anyone." Crossed that out too. Another page. "I wanted to know if I mattered without the noise, if I was more than a face. I didn't expect this." He paused, then ripped it up and tossed the pieces in the trash. He wasn't ready. He didn't know how to be ready. The truth felt heavier than the lie, because now he wasn't just hiding. He was hurting people with their own love. Back at the studio, Grace sat through another morning meeting with Dr. Calder. He spoke as if nothing had changed, rattling off medical terms and calmly answering her questions. But she wasn't listening to the words anymore. She was listening to the silences. Finally, she asked, "Have you spoken to him today?" Dr. Calder blinked. I don't think he was awake when I checked in." Grace tilted her head. "Because the call log from the studio says you were on the phone at 7:03 for 12 minutes. That wouldn't be a voicemail, would it?" He faltered, just slightly, but it was enough. "I'll have to check my records," he said. Grace didn't respond. She just nodded and stood to leave. Later that afternoon, she walked into the break room where Marisol was rearranging the quote wall. Today's said, "Truth is like a lion, let it loose. It will defend itself." Grace stared at it for a long moment. She wasn't sure if it was a sign or just coincidence, but her gut was no longer whispering. It was screaming. Something was being hidden, and she was going to find it. That night, she opened her laptop in her apartment and started digging. She typed every variation of Calder, hospital, and Keanu Reeves into public record databases. Nothing turned up under his real name. But then she had an idea. She searched for private patient suites, facilities that catered to high-prefacy individuals. There were only 3 in the Los Angeles area. One of them had a nurse listed publicly on LinkedIn. Her last job title was VIP Recovery Specialist. Grace copied the name, clicked, and started reading. And then her heart sank. In her list of endorsements, the nurse had a glowing review. From a man named Isaac Calder, under the same date as the hospitalization. The puzzle pieces weren't just falling into place, they were snapping into position. Grace closed her laptop slowly, her hands trembling. The realization was no longer a whisper or even a theory. It was fact. Keanu wasn't sick, or if he was, it wasn't what they'd been told. And the doctor, his friend, was part of it. She sat back in her chair, her breath shallow, mind racing through every interaction over the past 2 weeks. The missed calls, the odd phrasing in Calder's updates, the vague responses. Her eyes filled with tears, not because she was angry, but because she felt betrayed. All this time, she'd been pouring herself into holding the studio together. She'd been worrying herself sick, sleeping at her desk, writing letters to someone she believed might never come back, and he was hiding? Why? She didn't want to jump to conclusions. Keanu wasn't the kind of man who played with emotions. He had always been sincere, gentle. So if this was a test, it wasn't about manipulation. It had to be about pain, something deeper. But it didn't make the sting hurt any less. Across the city, Keanu stood near the hospital window, a package in one hand and a crumpled letter in the other. He had tried to write again, tried to tell the truth, but he'd failed. Again, he opened the box. Inside was a framed photo. Him and the entire indie studio team from last year's rap party. Everyone was laughing. Champagne, confetti. The note taped to the back read, "We're still with you, always, no matter what. Carla." Keanu turned away from the window. He didn't deserve this. Not this much love. Not this level of trust. And yet, they kept giving it. He walked back to his bed and opened his journal again. He wrote the first words that had felt real in days. "I've made a mistake, and I don't know how to come back from it." He didn't tear the page this time. He closed the book and placed it on the table. Outside, the city lights flickered in the night. Something was unraveling, and the reckoning had just begun. The studio's silence grew louder each day. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence that came after a long workday, or the kind that let creativity breathe. It was the kind that clung to walls, settled in corners, and wrapped around people like a fog they couldn't shake. Grace sat at her desk, her shoulders hunched, eyes scanning emails she couldn't absorb. The inbox was flooded, scripts needing feedback, budget files requiring approval, distributors requesting updates. But her brain felt numb. She hadn't eaten since a granola bar the night before. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Again. Across the studio, Marisol stood at the reception desk, her face pale and eyes rimmed with dark circles. She hadn't taken a full day off since Keanu's diagnosis. She came in early, stayed late, and answered every call with a smile that was growing more forced by the day. That morning, as she stood to greet a courier, her knees buckled. Papers scattered. She hit the floor before anyone could catch her. They rushed to her side. Carla helped her sit up. Elijah grabbed a cold cloth. Natalia brought water. Marisol insisted she was fine. Just tired, just skipped breakfast. But Grace saw it for what it was. A crack in the foundation. That same afternoon, Natalia burned her forearm pulling a tray of pasta from the oven. She didn't cry. She barely flinched. She just ran cold water over it, wrapped it with a dish towel, and went back to work. She said Keanu loved baked ziti, said he might want some when he came back. Leo was in the back studio composing again, headphones on, trying to write something uplifting, but the notes felt hollow, like he was playing through mud. He had restarted the same piece 11 times. It still didn't sound right. Denny had stopped talking altogether. He walked around with his camera, capturing moments, the quiet hallway, a lone light bulb flickering in the editing suite, Carla asleep on a beanbag chair, as if documenting grief would make it more bearable. Elijah tried to stay strong, tried to keep things moving. He coordinated project timelines, handled payroll, and reassured clients. But he couldn't fix the one thing that really mattered: Keanu's absence. Without him, there was no anchor, no heart. And then the call came. A major client, one of their largest investors, had reviewed the press rumors about Keanu's condition. "We're concerned about long-term stability," the client said. "We're pulling out of the fall pitch. Maybe we'll revisit next year." It was a gut punch. Grace listened in silence, thanked them for their time, and hung up. Then she walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against the wall. She didn't scream. She didn't sob. She just slid down to the floor and buried her face in her hands. She had nothing left to give. That evening, the studio lights dimmed earlier than usual. The team had gone home in silence. No one said goodnight. No one lingered. Grace remained behind, seated on the old leather couch in the screening room, still in the same clothes she'd worn for 3 days. She watched the ceiling, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, shivering slightly despite the summer warmth. The walls around her felt as if they were closing in. Every inch of the studio was covered in memories, frames of past projects, group photos, sticky notes with ideas they'd once shouted across the room in excitement. It felt like a living museum of Keanu's soul. And now it was crumbling. She reached into her bag and pulled out her journal. She flipped through pages she had once filled with hope. Each entry had started with some form of encouragement. Today was hard, but we're holding on. Or, the team cooked again. We laughed for a minute. Tonight, she wrote only one sentence. I don't know if we can survive this. Upstairs in the security office, the monitors continued to record. Keanu had set up the CCTV system years ago, not out of paranoia, but to ensure safety for the young talent who worked late at night. He rarely used it, but now he was watching, and he couldn't look away. One of the screens showed Grace in the screening room. He watched as she sat in silence, watched as she wrote something and stared at the page for too long. Her face was pale, cheeks drawn, lips chapped from dehydration. When she finally broke down and buried her face in her hands, something inside him fractured. He stood from his chair in the hospital suite, backing away from the monitor like it had burned him. This wasn't just a test anymore. It had become a wound. He never wanted this. He never wanted to see her cry, never wanted to cause this level of exhaustion, despair, or fear. He had convinced himself it was a harmless experiment, something to validate a quiet ache inside him. But it wasn't harmless. Not anymore. His team was falling apart. The people he loved were sacrificing everything, pushing themselves to the brink, all for a man they thought was slipping away, and they didn't even know the truth. They didn't know the pain wasn't in a hospital room. It was in the lie. Keanu pressed his palms against his face. His heart pounded. He turned toward the window. The lights of Los Angeles blinked in the distance like they always did. But for the first time in years, he couldn't feel the city. He only felt shame. He walked back to the desk, opened his notebook again, and this time, he didn't hesitate. He began writing a letter, not to the world, not even to the team, but to Grace. You've always been my anchor, my compass. I never doubted your heart. I only doubted whether I deserved it. He paused, then kept writing. Downstairs, Grace finally stood up. Her legs were shaky, but she forced herself to walk. Every movement felt heavier than it should have. She entered the kitchen to make tea, but her hands trembled too much to grip the mug. She sat at the table instead, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the tiled floor like it held answers. On the fridge, a photo of the team smiled back at her. Keanu stood in the center with one arm draped over Danny and the other around Natalia. Grace had taken that photo herself. He had made her laugh seconds before she clicked the shutter. That smile had once made everything feel possible. Now all she could think was how long it had been since she saw it. Just then, Carla walked in quietly. She hadn't gone home. Neither had Leo, who was still upstairs looping the same piece of music. Carla handed Grace a cup of chamomile tea and sat across from her, resting her head on the table. Everything's falling apart, Grace whispered. I know, Carla said, her voice soft. But we're still here. Grace blinked rapidly. But for how long? Carla didn't answer. She didn't need to. At that same moment, back in the hospital suite, Keanu sealed the envelope with shaking fingers. The letter he had written to Grace felt like the first honest thing he'd done in weeks. He couldn't send it yet, not until he figured out how to make things right. But it was a start. He looked at the pile of unopened letters beside his bed and whispered a silent apology to each one. His eyes drifted back to the security screen. Grace had moved to the kitchen. Carla was with her. The camera angle caught just enough to see Grace's shoulders shaking again as she silently cried into her tea. And that was it. That was the moment. The breaking point wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, intimate, raw. Keanu reached for his phone. He didn't call anyone. He just opened a blank message to Dr. Calder and typed, "It's over. I need to go back." He didn't press send. Not yet. But his thumb hovered over the button like a man ready to fall to his knees. And somewhere deep in his chest, the walls he'd built around his heart began to crumble. Dr. Isaac Calder sat alone at the edge of his hospital office, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he read Keanu's unsent message again. "It's over. I need to go back." He stared at those words for what felt like an hour. The weight of the secret was growing unbearable. His loyalty to Keanu had made him agree to something he should have never allowed, and now, every minute that passed was another nail in a coffin full of guilt. He picked up the phone and called Keanu. "I saw your message," Calder said, voice low. "You haven't pressed send." "I know," Keanu replied quietly. "You need to," Calder urged. "Keanu, if you wait any longer, this lie might cost you everything." There was a pause. Then Keanu exhaled slowly. "I'm afraid." "Of what?" "That when they find out the truth, they'll never forgive me." Calder leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "They loved you before they believed you were sick. That love was real. But you're giving it a reason to turn into something else." Silence. "You've got a choice, Keanu," he said. "Own it now, or watch it all fall apart without ever getting the chance to make it right." Keanu didn't answer. The call ended. Back at the studio, Grace was on edge. It was more than exhaustion now. It was instinct. The details in Calder's updates didn't align. There were discrepancies in dates, tests that didn't add up, missing doctor notes. And that morning, she had seen his phone light up on a desk. Keanu's name at the top of a recent call log. Her heart stopped. She had stared at that phone for a full minute before walking away, pulse pounding in her ears. Later that afternoon, she found Calder at the back of the studio, where he had come by under the guise of checking in on legal documentation for Keanu's medical file. Grace didn't wait for pleasantries. "You talked to him, didn't you?" she asked. Calder froze. "I saw the call log," she continued. "You spoke to Keanu, recently." Calder tried to mask his reaction, but the hesitation was damning. Grace stepped closer, voice firm. "Where is he, Isaac?" He blinked, looked away. "I need to know the truth," she said. "Not as his assistant, as someone who loves him. Is he dying or not?" Calder hesitated one last time. Then, quietly, he said, "He's not sick." Grace stepped back as if slapped. Grace stared at Dr. Calder, her breath caught in her throat. Her mind refused to accept what her ears had just heard. It echoed in her head like a cruel joke. "He's not sick." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't. "No," she said, her voice trembling. You must have misspoken. Maybe the diagnosis changed. Maybe he got better." Calder shook his head slowly. "There was never a diagnosis, Grace." She looked like she'd been punched. "That's not possible. The updates, the tests you told us about, his condition, all fabricated," he interrupted gently. "By me, at his request." She took another step back, this time bracing herself against the wall. Her fingers gripped the plaster so tightly, her knuckles whitened. "Hellman asked me to do it because he needed to know something," Calder said. "He needed to know if people cared about him without the fame, without the spotlight." Grace let out a broken laugh, part disbelief, part devastation. "So he faked dying to feel loved?" Calder didn't respond. "Hell watched us suffer," she continued, her voice rising. "He watched us fall apart. Marisol fainted. Natalia burned herself. I've been sleeping on the damn couch for 3 weeks, and he watched it all like it was some sort of emotional experiment." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I should have told you sooner," Calder said softly. "But I made a promise. I thought it would be brief. I thought he'd see what he needed and come back quickly. I didn't know he'd let it go this far." "You helped him," Grace whispered. "You helped him hurt the very people who would have stood by him no matter what." Calder nodded, ashamed. "I know." She paced the hallway in tight, trembling steps. "All this time I was writing to him, crying for him, praying for him. I thought we were losing someone we loved, and all along he was just hiding?" "I think he truly believed he wouldn't be missed," Calder said. "Well, now he knows better," she snapped. "At what cost?" He didn't answer. The air in the hallway was heavy, like it had thickened with betrayal. Grace grabbed her keys without another word and started for the door. Calder called after her, voice cracking with urgency. "Please don't be too hard on him. He's breaking under it." She stopped, just for a moment. Then she said without turning around, "So are we?" Grace drove like her hands were on fire. Every stoplight felt too long, every car too slow. Her chest ached. It wasn't just betrayal she was feeling. It was heartbreak. For someone she'd loved like a brother. For someone who had just proven he didn't believe in the love that surrounded him. How could someone so giving, so wise, be so blind? She gripped the steering wheel tighter. He had to answer for this. But more than that, she needed to see him, to look him in the eye, and ask him the question that had been burning a hole in her soul since Calder's confession. Why? The hospital came into view just as the sun dipped behind a curtain of gray clouds. Grace's tires screeched slightly as she pulled into the visitor lot and slammed the gear into park. She didn't wait, didn't breathe. Her feet carried her faster than her mind could process. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up when she demanded, "Which room is Samuel Reed in?" It was the name Keanu had used, his old pseudonym for private reservations. "Room 49. She marched down the hallway, her heels echoing sharply. Her eyes were red, her jaw clenched, every muscle in her body wound tight. As she neared the room, she slowed, not from hesitation, but from the sheer weight of what was about to happen. She stood outside the door for only a second. Then she knocked once and pushed it open. Keanu looked up from his hospital bed. His hair was unkempt, his face pale, eyes sunken not from illness, but from weeks of guilt and regret. The moment he saw Grace standing there, he froze. Grace didn't speak. Neither did he, but the pain that passed between their eyes in that moment said more than words could hold. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Keanu opened his mouth to say something, anything, but Grace raised her hand. Not angrily, just enough to say, "Not yet." She walked slowly toward the bed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't dying." His eyes dropped. "No," he admitted. "You watched us fall apart." His eyes glistened. "I did." Grace's voice cracked. "I cried for you." "I know," he said, a tremble in his tone. "I loved you like family." "I never doubted that," he whispered. She paused at the edge of the bed. "Then why didn't you believe it?" Keanu looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, he looked like himself again. Not the actor, not the man behind the plan, just a broken human being. "Because I didn't know how to accept love I didn't earn." Tears rolled down Grace's cheek. And then, without warning, she turned and walked out of the room, her heart too full to stay. She didn't slam the door, but the silence left behind felt like thunder. Grace didn't sleep that night. She drove aimlessly through the quiet Los Angeles streets, trying to make sense of the hurricane inside her chest. Her heart was torn between anger and heartbreak. She had loved Keanu like a brother, and he had tested that love with a cruelty he didn't even recognize. He hadn't lied to the public. He had lied to his family. By morning, she was outside the hospital again. The receptionist recognized her this time, and simply nodded. Room 409. She didn't knock. She burst through the door. Keanu was sitting in the same spot, same gown, same sunken eyes. But this time he stood up when he saw her. Grace's voice broke the silence, sharp and ragged. "How could you?" Keanu opened his mouth, but she raised her hand. "No," she said. "You don't get to explain yet." She stepped closer, her whole body shaking. "You watched us lose sleep. You watched us cry. You watched that studio fall apart. Natalia burned herself trying to make your favorite meal. Marisol collapsed. Elijah has been running around trying to save client meetings that are vanishing by the hour. I haven't been home in almost a month, Keanu." Her voice cracked. "And the entire time, you were just watching." "I wasn't." "Yes, you were," she snapped. "You were watching, and you didn't stop it. You let it happen." Keanu's hands trembled at his sides. "I was scared." Grace's face twisted. "Of what? That we wouldn't care? That our love wasn't real unless it came with suffering? You didn't test our love, you tested your own humanity." He stepped forward slightly, then stopped. "I didn't do it to hurt anyone, I swear. I needed to know if any of it was real, if anyone saw me for more than a name on a screen." Grace turned away from him for a moment, collecting herself. When she faced him again, her eyes were bloodshot. "You didn't need to fake an illness to find that out," she said. "You needed to listen." Keanu dropped into the chair behind him. "I didn't know how. Everything felt empty. Every thank you, every handshake, every smile. It felt like it was all for the idea of me, not the person." Grace looked at him, broken and exposed, and her heart ached despite herself. "I get it," she said softly. "I do. You've spent your life being praised by strangers, but that doesn't give you the right to put the people who love you through hell." Keanu nodded, tears now silently slipping down his cheeks. "I know." Grace didn't move for a moment. She watched him cry, and something inside her shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. The man before her wasn't just Keanu Reeves, the actor, the giver, the legend. He was a man who had let fear and loneliness twist his judgment. And that man was crumbling. She walked slowly to the chair across from him and sat down. "I can't just forget what you did," she said. "I don't expect you to," Keanu replied, his voice hoarse. I couldn't breathe anymore. I felt like everyone loved a version of me that wasn't real. I didn't know how to tell anyone that I felt invisible in plain sight." Grace leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her eyes never leaving his. "And what about us?" she asked. "What about the people who saw you every day, who worked beside you, who stayed late because they cared? Not because of your fame, but because of your heart." "I didn't think I deserved that kind of love," he whispered. Grace stared at him. "So you tested it. You set up a stage and waited to see if we'd perform our loyalty?" He wiped his eyes and nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I did." Grace looked down at her hands. "I wrote to you every night, journal entries, prayers. I sent them to Dr. Calder thinking maybe he could read them to you when you were too weak to speak." Keanu's head lowered in shame. "I watched every one of those videos," he said quietly. "Yours, Carla's, Leo's. I cried every night." "Then why didn't you come back sooner?" she asked. "I was afraid that once I admitted the truth, it would all disappear, that your love would turn to anger, that the pain I caused couldn't be undone." Grace shook her head. "It can't be undone, but that doesn't mean it can't be healed." Keanu looked up, startled. "You think it's possible?" "I think," she said slowly, "that you broke something. But not everything, some of it. Some of it might still be strong enough to rebuild." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "I don't know how to say I'm sorry," he said. "You don't get to say it once," Grace replied. "You show it. Over and over again." Keanu nodded. "I will, Whatever it takes." There was a long pause. The air between them no longer crackled with fury, but with something more tender, something raw. Grace stood up. "I'm not staying because you deserve it," she said. "I'm staying because I believe in second chances." He looked up at her with eyes full of gratitude and disbelief. "I don't deserve you," he said. "No," she agreed. "You don't. But people don't earn grace. It's given." Keanu couldn't hold it in anymore. The dam broke. He covered his face with his hands and sobbed. Not silent tears this time. Not the slow drip of a man trying to stay composed, but full, shaking, guttural sobs that echoed in the small hospital room. Grace stepped forward and knelt in front of him. She gently pulled his hands from his face and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "I've got you," she whispered, "but don't ever do this again." He nodded against her shoulder, the tears soaking through her blouse. "I won't," he choked out. For the first time in weeks, Keanu Reeves didn't feel alone. For the first time in years, he let someone hold his pain. And for the first time in his life, he believed he was loved, even when he didn't feel worthy of it. Grace stood in the middle of the studio, heart pounding in her chest. The same walls that had once echoed with laughter and the energy of dreams now felt heavy with silence. Everyone had gathered in the open-floor workspace, 8 people who had held this place together through chaos and grief. Now they sat scattered on couches, chairs, leaning against walls, waiting for her to speak. She had rehearsed this moment in her head, but now that it was here, her mouth felt dry. "I have to tell you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I need you all to hear me out." Denny looked up from the coffee mug in his hands. Carla's laptop was closed, untouched. Ron stood near the kitchenette, arms folded. Natalia had stopped prepping the lunch trays. Marisol was wringing her hands. Elijah looked tense. Leo leaned forward, eyes wary. Avery, the youngest, sat cross-legged on the floor, quiet and alert. Grace took a breath. "Keanu isn't sick." The words landed like a brick thrown through glass. Carla blinked. "What do you mean?" Grace met every eye in the room. "He's not in treatment. There's no autoimmune condition. It was a test. He staged the whole thing. Asked Dr. Calder to help fake the diagnosis. He's been hiding at a private hospital under a false name." Marisol's mouth fell open. Why would he do that?" "We wanted to know if we cared about him as a person," Grace said. "Not as a celebrity, not as a boss. Just as him." He didn't trust it. He thought maybe all of this was built on his name, that none of it was real. There was a long pause. It was Elijah who broke it, rubbing a hand over his face. "Am I the only one? Let us go through all that just to test our loyalty?" "He didn't mean for it to spiral," Grace said. "He watched it hurt us. And it tore him apart. I saw it. But he was scared. Scared if he came back, he'd destroy everything." Danny stood slowly, setting down his cup. "I thought of him as a father." The room went still. "I never knew my dad. Keanu didn't just hire me. He came to my short film premiere when nobody else did. He waited until everyone left and said I reminded him of himself at 25. The next morning, I had a grant and new camera gear waiting in my email. No questions, no press." His hands trembled. "I would have walked through fire for him. And he thought he had to lie to see if I cared." Grace's eyes welled. "I don't think he knew how much he mattered to you." Natalia raised her hand slightly, her voice cracking. "He paid for my mother's surgery. She was going blind. He found out somehow. Quietly, paid the entire hospital bill. I never asked for help. I just came into work one day, and my mom was home from the hospital, smiling again." Carla stared at the floor, shaking her head. "Hem was always quiet about his kindness," Grace said. "But it was always there." Leo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "He caught me sleeping in my car once. This was back when I'd just joined the studio. I didn't want to ask for help. I was embarrassed. The next day, he handed me an envelope with a key. It was to a fully paid sublet near the studio. No lease, no questions. He just said, "Everyone needs a safe place to rest." Avery, usually shy, cleared his throat. I was homeless when I met him, working part-time as a background actor. I stole food from craft services and he noticed. I thought I was going to get fired. Instead, he pulled me aside and offered me a job helping out on set. I've had a roof over my head ever since. He never treated me like charity, just like I was human. Ron, silent until now, spoke from the back. His voice was deep, steady, but there was a quiet tremble under it. My son's bike chain broke one night, right outside the studio. It was dark, and we were stuck. Keanu came walking out, already on his way home, and instead of ignoring us, he knelt down next to my boy and spent an hour fixing that thing. By streetlight. Said nothing about it the next day, never even mentioned it again. But my son still talks about that night like it was magic. Marisol finally found her voice. I got a raise out of nowhere a few months ago. I thought it was a mistake. When I asked Grace about it, she told me Keanu approved it because I was taking care of my sick grandmother. I never told him that. He just knew. Carla hugged a pillow tightly. He once stayed after hours with me while I was fixing a corrupted project file. Everyone else had gone home. He didn't say much, just sat there. I was crying from stress. He made me tea, played music, never left my side until I got it working again. I didn't even realize what that meant until now. Grace listened to all of them. Their voices, one by one, cracked open something deeper than just betrayal. Beneath their anger lived stories they had carried in silence. Now, those stories filled the room. I was furious, she admitted, wiping a tear from her cheek. Still am. But when I saw him last night, he was a wreck. He wasn't sitting on a throne laughing at us. He was sobbing. Because it worked. Because we cared. And that crushed him. Carla looked up, her voice hoarse. Why didn't he just ask? Because I think part of him was afraid the answer would break him, Grace said. He's been through more than we know. He hides his hurt behind service, behind humility, but it doesn't mean he doesn't feel alone. Denny sat down again, sighing deeply. He's still human. I forgot that. Elijah leaned on the table, looking around the room. So what now? Grace shook her head. That's up to all of us. I'm not going to force anything. If anyone wants to leave, no one will blame you. But I had to tell you the truth, because you deserved it. Leo was the first to speak. I'm staying. I don't forgive him yet, but I believe in what we've built here, and I believe he regrets this. Carla hesitated, then nodded. Me too. I'll need time, Natalia said softly. But I don't want to leave this family. Ron grunted and walked over to the supply closet. He pulled out a mop and bucket and started wiping the floor, his way of saying he wasn't going anywhere. Marisol smiled faintly. He broke our hearts, but not the foundation, not this place. Avery whispered, He gave me a life. I'm staying. Grace looked at them, overwhelmed. Then maybe we can heal this. One honest step at a time. The meeting didn't end with applause or a resolution. It ended with silence. But it wasn't the silence of resentment anymore. It was the silence of reflection, of fragile hope starting to take root. They didn't know how to rebuild yet, but they weren't walking away. And that, for now, was enough. Keanu stood just outside the glass doors of the studio, the same ones he had quietly exited weeks ago under the weight of his own doubt. Now he returned, not as an actor or a leader, but as a man who had made a mistake. The sky was overcast, and the wind carried a chill that mirrored the unease in his chest. His hand hovered over the door for a moment, then he stepped in. The lobby was quiet. Grace had cleared the schedule for the day. No filming, no meetings, Just one gathering in the main studio room where the lights had been dimmed and chairs arranged in a wide circle. No one spoke as he entered. Eyes lifted, some weary, some guarded, all waiting. Keanu walked to the center of the room and turned slowly to face each of them. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were steady. "I know," he said gently, "before anything else. I know what I did hurt all of you, and I came here to say I'm sorry." No dramatic speech followed, just silence. He let the words hang there, heavy but honest. "I thought I needed to know who would still care if I wasn't me. Not the guy on screen, not the man behind the funding, just the human. The truth is, I didn't trust your love. And that's my failure." He looked toward Grace first. "You gave your heart to this place, Grace. You carried it when I dropped it. I saw you sleep on the floor. I saw you weep in that corner. You didn't deserve that." Grace blinked quickly and nodded once, arms folded tightly. Keanu turned to the others. "Each of you gave more than your job required. You gave loyalty, time, your families, your health. I watched you from that hospital bed, and every night it broke me. Because I thought this test would make me feel safe. Instead, it showed me how selfish I was." He paused, then took a slow breath. "I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. I came here to listen." He gestured to the circle of chairs, then, quietly, he sat down. No one moved at first. Then Danny stood up, exhaling hard. "I cried when I heard you were sick, like a kid, because I thought I was going to lose someone who gave me purpose. I looked up to you like a father, man. But when I found out it was a lie, I didn't know how to feel." He sat again, wiping his face. Natalia was next. Her voice shook. "You gave me hope when I didn't have any. When my mom needed surgery and I didn't know how to pay for it, you just handled it. You didn't even tell me. I found out through hospital billing. That's who you are. So when you faked this illness, it felt like a betrayal. But deep down, I knew it came from pain." Keanu nodded, eyes full. Elijah leaned forward, his voice quiet but steady. "You built this place so people like me could finally have a voice. You gave me a shot when no one else would. That's something I'll never forget. But this stunt, it made me question everything. Not just you, myself too. I wondered if I was really doing it for the work or just for your approval." He looked down at his hands, then back at Keanu. "I think what you did was wrong. But I also think pain makes us do stupid things, so maybe now we build again, together, on truth." Carla took a breath and stepped into the center. "I lost my brother to a real illness. Watching someone I care about pretend to be dying, it was brutal. I was angry, still am if I'm being honest. But I've also seen who you are outside this mistake. You visited my brother in hospice when you didn't have to, stayed longer than most of our relatives. So no, I won't throw that away. But trust takes time." Keanu nodded slowly, his voice caught when he replied, "Take all the time you need." Ron cleared his throat next. "I'm not a man of many words, but when my son's bike broke before his birthday party, you stayed after a long shoot to fix it with me. No cameras, no fuss, just a wrench and a good heart. You've always been the kind of boss people only dream about. That's why this hurts so much, but I get it. We all have cracks. I've got mine too." He gave a small nod, then stepped back. Marisol, the receptionist, wiped her eyes. "When I passed out that day, I thought maybe I'd failed you somehow. Like if I'd just worked harder, prayed harder, you'd get better. But you weren't sick. You were scared. I see that now. And part of me still wants to scream at you, but the bigger part still cares." Keanu looked around the circle, tears quietly tracking down his cheeks. "You all gave me more than I deserved. I didn't earn your loyalty. I took it for granted, but I'm not going to waste it again." He pulled out a folder from his coat and set it in the center of the room. "This is something new. It's called the Studio Family Project. It's not about films. It's about you. Every one of you." He turned to Grace. "It includes paid mental health days, full medical coverage for all your families, and a yearly sabbatical for any team member who needs a break. No questions asked." Eyes widened. Grace's mouth parted slightly in surprise. "I realized something while sitting in that hospital," Keanu continued. "The real legacy of this place isn't the movies we make. It's the people we protect. That's what matters." For a moment, no one moved. Then Leo stood up. "I wrote a song," he said softly, "while you were gone. It wasn't finished, but maybe it is now." He sat at the piano in the corner of the studio. His fingers hovered, then pressed the first keys. A slow, simple melody filled the space. Quiet, reflective. A few bars in, Carla picked up her camera and began recording, not for publicity, but for memory. Keanu sat still, letting the music wash over him. Around him, the studio began to shift. People moved their chairs closer. Shoulders leaned in. The distance between them started to dissolve. And for the first time in weeks, the space felt whole again. Not perfect, but whole. Keanu closed his eyes and whispered to himself, just loud enough to hear, "Thank you for not walking away." It started with soup, a small, quiet gesture. Keanu showed up at Natalia's doorstep on a rainy morning with a thermos in hand and a humble smile on his face. Her bandaged arm was still healing from the burn she'd gotten during the studio chaos, and when she opened the door and saw him, she didn't speak right away. She just stared, unsure how to respond. "I didn't come to apologize," Keanu said softly. "You already heard that. I came to help." Natalia stepped aside, eyes full of unspoken emotion. He walked in, placed the soup on the stove, and without waiting for an invitation, started wiping down her counters, refilling her fridge, and fixing the loose cabinet door he'd noticed last time he'd visited months ago. She watched him the whole time, arms crossed, lips pressed together. When he finally sat beside her on the couch and handed her a warm bowl, she spoke. "You really mean it, don't you?" He nodded. "Every minute I lied made me smaller. This is my way of growing back." Later that afternoon, Keanu drove across the city to pick up Marisol. Her doctor's appointment was scheduled at a clinic over an hour away, and she hadn't told anyone at the studio, but Grace had. Quietly. Without a big moment or announcement, Keanu showed up at the curb in a black beanie and old hoodie, barely recognizable, holding a bottle of water and a snack bar. "I'll drive," he said. Marisol, already exhausted from the past weeks, didn't argue. The car ride was quiet at first, both of them staring out at the Los Angeles traffic. But halfway there, she broke the silence. "You made me feel invisible, Keanu." "I know. I thought I mattered to you." "You do," he said, voice low. "That's why I'm here." She blinked fast, then looked away. "Don't disappear like that again. Not like that." "I won't." He waited in the car during her appointment. When she came back out, he opened the door for her without a word and drove her straight to her favorite smoothie shop. She smiled for the first time in days. The next evening, he showed up at Elijah's place. Not to talk business, not even to say sorry, just to babysit. Elijah opened the door, stunned to see Keanu standing there with a stuffed bunny tucked under one arm. "You said you haven't had a date night in 3 years, Keanu said. "Tonight's the night." Elijah looked at his wife, then back at Keanu. "Are you serious?" "I've memorized the bedtime routine. Grace helped me make flashcards." The couple laughed, a little stunned, and then Elijah handed over the diaper bag like he was passing a torch. Keanu spent the night playing peekaboo, singing lullabies off-key, and crawling around the living room on all fours. When the baby finally fell asleep, he sat in the rocking chair, heart aching with a mix of exhaustion and warmth. He wasn't doing any of this for redemption points. He wasn't trying to clear his name. He was just trying to be better. At the studio, things were quieter, lighter. Ron began sharing jokes again. Carla brought in cookies. Leo left handwritten notes of encouragement on everyone's desk. Even Danny, who had been the most devastated, started dropping by Keanu's office again, just to talk about lenses and lighting. The trust wasn't fully restored, but it was growing back, slowly, like ivy on a weathered wall. And then, just when the air finally felt breathable again, a storm broke. Grace was scrolling through her inbox when the subject line stopped her cold. Anonymous tip: fake illness at Silver Hollow Studio. Investigation pending. Journalist Nora Sanders. Her stomach turned. She clicked the email open, her breath catching. And there it was. A leak. A betrayal. The lie they had just begun to heal from was about to go public. Grace stared at the email in stunned silence. The words blurred for a second, her heart pounding in her chest. She immediately forwarded it to Keanu with a short message. "We have a problem." Minutes later, Keanu was pacing in his office, the color drained from his face. The subject line alone had been enough to shake him, but now he was reading the actual contents. A detailed report, referencing insider knowledge about the fabricated diagnosis, the staged absence, and even hints that the team had been emotionally manipulated. "How did this leak?" Keanu muttered aloud. "Who would—" Grace stood across from him, phone in hand. "We may never know. It could be someone who overheard something at the hospital, a former employee, or someone who thought they were protecting us by exposing it." He dropped into his chair, head in his hands. "They're going to crucify me." "No," Grace said firmly. "They're going to try, but that doesn't mean they win." Keanu looked up. "We just got back on our feet. The trust, the healing. This will ruin everything." Grace exhaled slowly. "Then you need to do what you've been doing. Show up, be honest, not just with us, now with the world." That night, Keanu didn't sleep. He stayed in his office, rereading every journal Grace had written during the weeks he'd been sick. He watched every staff video again. Danny's tears, Carla's quiet bravery, Ron's steady determination. And he realized that whatever damage might come from the world knowing the truth, hiding again would only make things worse. The next morning, Keanu walked into the studio conference room where his team had gathered. They'd all seen the news. Nora Sanders had wasted no time. The article was already live, titled, "Hollywood's Nicest Man Fakes Loyalty. What he did next may redeem him." The room was quiet when he entered. No cameras, no press, just his people. "I know," Keanu said. "You've already heard." No one responded. "I can't control the headlines, but I can control this room. I can look each of you in the eye and say, I'm still ashamed, I'm still learning, and I'm still here." Ron folded his arms but gave a small nod. Natalia's eyes shimmered. Danny looked down at his hands. Keanu continued. "What I did, it came from fear. Deep, aching fear. I thought love was earned through effort and gone without status. I didn't trust that I could just be me." There was a long silence. Then Marisol said quietly, "We've seen the real you, Keanu. Not because of the test, in spite of it," Leo added, "and we're still here." One by one the others spoke, some still hurt, some still cautious, but no one walked out. Keanu stepped forward and bowed his head. "Thank you, all of you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will earn your faith, every single day." The storm had come, but the foundation was holding, and now the world would watch, not a scandal unfold, but a redemption that was already in motion. By the time the sun rose over Los Angeles the next morning, the internet was already burning. Keanu Reeves faked terminal illness to test loyalty. Hollywood betrayal. Fans shocked by Keanu's deception? Is the actor we love just another lie? Reeves's private studio in crisis. Staff react to fabricated health scare. The headlines were everywhere. News vans blocked the street outside the studio's modest brick building. Camera crews staked out the parking lot, desperate for a shot of someone, anyone, close to Keanu. Fans and critics swarmed social media. Some felt betrayed. Some defended him. Others simply asked, why? Inside the studio, Grace Navarro stood at the window, watching the chaos unfold below. Her jaw tightened. She'd hoped that the article would fade, that the world might move on before things exploded. But that was naive. This was Keanu Reeves. The world didn't just watch him, it dissected him. Keanu, meanwhile, sat at his desk, quiet. He hadn't spoken much that morning. A statement was being drafted. His publicist had begged him to spin it, to mention mental health or stress, but he had refused. If this was going to be the end of his career, he wasn't going to lie his way out of it. At 10 a.m., a call came in from a local news station. We'd like to schedule an on-camera statement today. You'll want to get ahead of this before TMZ or Page 6 run something worse. Keanu agreed. By noon, a makeshift podium had been set up in the studio's small atrium. A black curtain backdrop, a few folding chairs for press. No frills, no lawyers, no agent, no handlers, just Keanu. As the hour approached, his heart pounded, not from fear of public reaction, but from shame. He had spent decades building a reputation of authenticity, generosity, humility, and now, a single act of emotional weakness was about to define him forever. He slipped on a simple black suit, no tie. He looked out the window at the gathering crowd. Reporters, fans, protesters, supporters. Signs with, "We still love you," and others that said, "Why Keanu?" fluttered in the summer breeze. Grace entered the room just as he picked up his notes. "Are you ready?" she asked. Keanu looked up at her. "No, but I need to do it anyway." She hesitated, then did something unexpected. She reached out and took the notes from his hand. "What are you doing?" "You don't have to do this alone." A moment later, the studio door opened. One by one, every member of the team began to walk in. Danny, Carla, Ron, Natalia, Leo, Marisol, Elijah. Each of them stood beside Keanu in silence. Grace took his arm gently and led him forward. "You're not the only one with something to say." The murmurs outside grew louder as cameras clicked and microphones were raised, their red lights blinking with hunger. The reporters expected a solo statement, a confession, a fall from grace. But when Keanu walked onto the makeshift stage, flanked by his entire studio team, the atmosphere shifted. Grace stepped forward first. Calm, composed, but visibly shaken, she faced the wall of flashing cameras. "I know many of you came here today expecting outrage," she began. "Some expected scandal, others demanded punishment. But we're not here to give you a rehearsed apology. We're here to tell the truth." She turned slightly toward Keanu, then looked back at the cameras. Keanu Reeves is not dying. He never was. But what he did, what we all went through, is real. It started with fear. Fear of not being loved for who he truly is. Fear that behind the fame, the kindness, the generosity, no one would care if he wasn't him. Keanu's face tightened. Grace didn't sugarcoat it. "Made a terrible decision," she continued. "He asked a trusted friend to help him fake an illness so he could see who genuinely cared. And we were all swept into that lie. We were scared. We cried. We broke down. Some of us got hurt." Natalia nodded quietly, her hand bandaged from the burn she suffered. "But here's what most of the headlines won't tell you," Grace said, her voice gaining strength. "When we thought we were losing him, we shared things we never would have said otherwise. We cooked for him, we wrote songs, we made tribute videos. And when we found out the truth, we didn't walk away." She looked over at Danny. This man cried for hours the day he thought Keanu might never walk into this building again. He wasn't crying for a celebrity. He was crying for someone he considers family. She turned to Carla. She made a tribute reel and worked overnight without sleep because she wanted Keanu to feel remembered if anything happened. Leo composed music that we still haven't stopped playing in the office. Ron scrubbed every inch of the studio because he believed it's what Keanu would want if it were his last week alive. Grace paused, letting the silence speak louder than the noise of the cameras. Yes, we were hurt, but we were also reminded of what this place really means. This studio isn't just Keanu's project. It's our home. And he didn't fake an illness for attention. He did it because he's human and scared. And he didn't know how else to ask if he mattered without the title. Keanu stepped forward. His voice was soft but firm. I want to apologize to everyone here and everyone out there. What I did was wrong. I see that now. I thought I could handle the consequences, but I didn't understand the weight of what I was risking. Trust is sacred, and I broke it. He looked at each of his teammates, pausing as his eyes lingered on Grace. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to earn it. Not just from my friends, from all of you watching. A journalist called out, "Keanu, do you regret it?" He looked straight ahead. I regret hurting people. I regret not speaking my fears out loud. But what I don't regret is what I've learned. That these people, they loved me before the lie. They love me now, not because I'm famous, but because we built something real. And I'll spend every day proving I never needed to test that in the first place. Another voice rang out. Will you continue running the studio? Keanu glanced at Grace, then nodded. Only if they'll have me. There was a pause. And then Carla stepped forward. You're still our leader, Keanu, just a flawed one, like the rest of us. Reporters tried to press further, but Grace held up her hand. That's all we have to say today. Print your stories, run your headlines, but remember, behind every name you write about, there's a human being trying to figure things out. The team walked off the stage together, shoulder to shoulder. Outside, the headlines would still swirl, but inside the studio, something even stronger was forming. A second beginning, a deeper trust. And the world had just seen a story not of scandal, but of redemption. The room had gone still. Cameras were no longer flashing. The reporters who had arrived expecting a dramatic confession now sat stunned in their seats. Grace's speech wasn't the usual PR spin or crisis control tactic. It was something raw, unfiltered, honest. And it pierced through the skepticism in a way no corporate statement ever could. Then, one by one, Keanu's team stepped forward. Denny was the first. Normally quiet and camera-shy, the young cinematographer clutched a crumpled note in his shaking hands. But he didn't read from it. I'm not good at this stuff, he said softly. I came to this studio after being told I wasn't cut out for Hollywood. I had one camera, no reel, and no connections. Keanu watched my student film on a whim and gave me a chance. He said, everyone starts somewhere. You're starting here. He paused, looking at Keanu. That moment changed my life, and yeah, he messed up, but only because he didn't know we already loved him back. Carla stepped forward next. Her voice was stronger, but there was emotion laced behind every word. Keanu found me editing trailers in my garage, she said. I was about to give up. My dad was sick. I needed stable income. He offered me a job without asking for a resume. Told me my cuts had soul. I've been here ever since. Her voice cracked slightly. He thought we only cared because he was famous. But honestly, it's the opposite. We cared despite the fame. Because he saw us. Leo, the composer, followed. He brought his guitar with him, cradling it like a piece of himself. I wrote a song the night we thought we'd lose him, he said. And I wasn't the only one crying over it. We were all shattered. That tells you everything. You don't grieve for someone who doesn't matter. Natalia spoke about how Keanu had secretly paid for her mother's operation. Ron described the time Keanu showed up to fix his son's broken bike at 10 o'clock at night and stayed to help him with homework. Elijah told the room how Keanu had quietly paid for his child's speech therapy sessions when the insurance company rejected the claim. Each story built on the last. Each one was like a brick stacking higher and higher until the towering picture of who Keanu truly was stood undeniable before the press. Marisol took the mic last. The young receptionist had never spoken publicly before. Her voice wavered at first, but what she said cut deepest of all. "I grew up with nothing," she began. "Single mom, bad neighborhood. When I got hired, I thought I was just going to answer phones. But Keanu came out of his office on day one and remembered my name. Every day since then, he's asked how I'm doing. Not out of politeness, like really asked. Like he cared." She looked out at the rows of journalists. "He doesn't talk much, but he listens, more than anyone I've ever known." She turned to face Keanu, whose eyes were red and glassy. "You should have just asked us, Keanu. We'd have told you the truth without all this pain." There was a long silence in the room. Even the most seasoned reporters looked away, blinking fast. Then, one voice rose from the crowd. It was Nora Sanders, the investigative journalist who had broken the original story. She stood, holding her notebook loosely in one hand. "I came here to cover a scandal," she said, "but what I witnessed was something very different. I've interviewed politicians, CEOs, and celebrities. None of them, ever, had people speak about them like that." She stepped forward slightly, the weight of the moment shifting as she closed her notebook. This wasn't just a press conference. This was a love letter, disguised as a reckoning. Nora looked at Keanu, thoughtful. "I'm going to publish a new piece, not because you need damage control, but because the world needs the full story. The human story." A few camera shutters clicked again, but this time it wasn't a frenzy. It was quiet documentation of something rare. Vulnerability, accountability, redemption. By the time the team filed out of the room, there were no shouted questions, no swarms, just silence, and then a ripple of soft applause. Later that evening, Nora's story hit every major platform. Its title read, "The Lie That Revealed the Truth," inside Keanu Reeves' studio and the people who loved him anyway. It didn't go viral because it was juicy. It went viral because it was true. The article painted a full picture, warts and all. Nora didn't spare the uncomfortable details. She described Keanu's emotional spiral, his misguided plan, the consequences, and the collateral damage, but she balanced it with the moments that had come after. The late-night visits, the meals delivered in silence, the real tears, the steady hands that didn't flinch when it mattered most. Within hours, the tide turned. Headlines stopped using the word scam. Comments beneath the article read like open confessions from readers. I did something similar once. Pushed people away to see who'd stay. Never thought I'd cry over a Hollywood story, but here I am. We all want to be loved without asking for it. Keanu just made the mistake of trying to prove it. Celebrities began to weigh in too. Former co-stars tweeted their own stories, how Keanu had sent flowers on their mother's death anniversary or offered to help pay tuition for a niece. Directors shared photos from late-night shoots where he stayed behind to help move lights or wrap cables. Quiet moments no one had ever posted before. Until now. The collective response became its own movement. A trending hashtag emerged. Prove kindness. Not to test others, but to live it openly. To give the benefit of the doubt. To tell people how much they matter before they're gone. Keanu remained quiet during all of it. He didn't post, tweet, or issue new statements. Instead, he returned to the work, to the people, to the quiet corners of the studio where stories were being shaped by hearts, not just hands. Grace found him in the editing bay one night, helping Carla sort through footage for their next project. No fanfare, no spotlight, just Keanu, wearing the same hoodie he always did, headphones slung around his neck. "You okay?" Grace asked. Keanu looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled, without guilt behind it. "I am now," he said. "Because I don't need to wonder anymore." The morning was unusually quiet at the studio. No rushed footsteps, no ringing phones, just the soft hum of the air conditioning and a scent of fresh coffee in the break room. Keanu arrived later than usual, escorted by Grace, who had insisted he come in without asking questions. She told him the team had something planned, a surprise, but one he had more than earned. As they walked down the main hallway, Keanu noticed something strange. Every poster, every frame along the corridor had been temporarily removed. In their place were blank black panels, like empty canvases waiting for meaning. Keanu glanced at Grace, confused, but she only smiled and kept walking. When they reached the large creative conference room, the very room where Keanu had once pitched his vision for a studio that would honor heart over hype, Grace paused and gently pushed open the door. What Keanu saw made him stop breathing for a moment. The room had been transformed. Along the back wall, stretching 20 feet wide and 10 feet high, was a sprawling collage of letters, photos, sticky notes, and sketches, each handwritten, printed, or drawn by someone whose life Keanu had touched. At the top, spelled out in bold block letters, "The Memory Wall." For a few seconds, Keanu didn't move. His hand went to his chest. His eyes scanned the wall like a man trying to read a foreign language and realizing it was the language of love. Grace stepped forward and whispered, "These are from everyone, not just the team. Former co-stars, janitors, extras, crew, fans, people whose names you might not even know, but they remember what you did for them. All right, this is it. Meet me at the brownstone." She gently placed a small folder in his hand. Inside was a letter from the stunt coordinator of a film Keanu did 2 decades ago. The man had broken his spine on set. No one paid his hospital bills, but Keanu did, quietly, anonymously. The letter read, "I never knew it was you until years later. You saved my life and my daughter's future." Next to it on the wall was a torn napkin with a child's drawing. Underneath, a message in shaky handwriting said, "Mr. Reeves gave my mommy a ride when our car broke. He made me laugh when I was scared. She never forgot." Keanu's lips trembled. He stepped closer, reading each note, touching some gently. There was one from a waitress who'd been fired after trying to give him a free coffee as a thank you for helping her brother find rehab. Keanu had paid the restaurant rent for 3 months so they wouldn't have to close. She wrote, "That coffee was never about money. It was about what you gave us, hope." Keanu kept reading, slowly, as if each note was too precious to rush through. Every square inch of the wall held a story. Some were scribbled hastily on receipts. Others were typed out in long paragraphs. Many had no names, just initials or drawings or fingerprints in smudged ink. But every one of them pulsed with the kind of invisible gratitude that filled the room more loudly than any applause ever could. One story was from a young actress who said she had almost quit Hollywood after being harassed on a film set. Keanu had quietly intervened, connected her with legal help, and helped her relocate to a safer neighborhood. She had written, "You didn't know me. You didn't have to believe me, but you did. I owe you my career and my peace." Another came from a sound technician who had been going through a bitter divorce during a production. "One day I lost it during lunch," the note read. Everyone looked away. "You sat beside me, shared your sandwich, and said, 'I don't know what you're carrying, but you don't have to carry it alone.' I think that was the first time in months I didn't feel invisible." Tears streamed down Keanu's face. He didn't try to hide them. Not this time. Grace stood silently beside him, not speaking, just present. She had always been the kind of leader who understood when words were unnecessary. Across the room, the rest of the team stood in respectful silence. Marisol was wiping tears from her cheeks. Ron had his arms crossed, but his jaw was trembling. Carla had her camera slung around her neck, though she made no move to use it. Even Avery, usually the quietest of them all, had both hands clenched into fists, holding back something fierce and emotional. His task was done, and he sat back down, his face now pale and focused. They looked professional cops, holding something fierce and emotional. Finally, Grace stepped forward. She placed her hand on Keanu's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He leaned into it. "Now you know," she said softly. "You've always been loved, not because you're Keanu Reeves the actor, but because you showed up when no one asked you to. You did the work that no one saw, and we saw it anyway." Keanu turned to face the team, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to say." Ron spoke first, his deep voice cracking. "Then don't. Just let it sink in." Natalia stepped forward. "You helped all of us in ways we didn't even realize until now. This wall isn't about guilt, it's about truth." Carla finally raised her camera. "May I?" she asked. Keanu nodded. She clicked the shutter. That photo would later hang in the lobby of the studio, right beside the memory wall. In it, Keanu stood surrounded by the people he had quietly shaped, redeemed, and lifted through his actions, not his fame. Grace then cleared her throat. "We didn't build this wall for today. We built it so you never forget tomorrow." There was silence again, the kind that comes only after truth has been spoken. Later that day, Keanu returned to the room alone. He stood for hours, reading every note again, and this time he brought a pen. He began adding his own sticky notes beside theirs. Some just said thank you. Others shared short memories from his perspective. A few said, "I remember that day too." And one, placed dead center of the wall, read simply, "You saved me too." He left the pen in the tray beneath the wall, inviting anyone at any time to keep writing. The memory wall wasn't just about the past. It became a living archive of everything that made the studio more than a business. It became a symbol of what real leadership looks like. Quiet, imperfect, human. And in that moment, Keanu understood something he had always struggled to believe. He didn't have to test people to know if they truly cared, because they already had. They always had. He had simply forgotten how to believe it. But the wall reminded him, and it would keep reminding him forever. Months had passed since the press conference, since the memory wall, since the lie that changed everything. What once felt like a betrayal had become the foundation for something stronger. The studio hadn't just survived. It had evolved. The air inside the studio had changed. The tension that used to hum quietly behind meetings and schedules had been replaced with something warmer. People looked each other in the eyes more often. Laughter was louder. Breaks were real breaks now, filled with shared snacks, spontaneous guitar strumming from Leo in the hallway, and stories that didn't revolve around production deadlines. Keanu had changed too, not in some dramatic way, but in small, daily choices that meant everything. He no longer hid in his office or slipped out unnoticed after long shoots. Instead, he started check-in circles every Friday morning. There was no formal agenda. Just a circle of chairs in the studio cafe, coffee in hand, and time carved out for one question. How are you really? At first, it was awkward. People were shy, unsure of how much to share. But then Ron had spoken up about the anniversary of his brother's passing. Grace mentioned the anxiety she'd been carrying. Marisol admitted she hadn't been sleeping well. And Keanu? He simply said, "Some days I still don't know how to forgive myself." No one judged, they just listened. And that changed everything. One particular morning, the check-in circle had a new face. Her name was Bella. She was a 20-year-old film intern with nervous energy and a quiet voice. It was her second week. She hadn't spoken much during the first circle, just listened with wide eyes. But this time, after a pause, she raised her hand. "I hope this isn't out of line," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I read about everything. The illness, the press, the lie. I didn't want to believe it when I applied here. I thought maybe it wasn't true. But now that I'm here, and I've seen how you all are with each other, I want to ask something." Keanu leaned forward slightly, giving her his full attention. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her words delicate but sincere. "Why fake something so serious?" The room fell still. Some people looked down. Others stared at Keanu, curious to hear if he'd answer differently now. He took a deep breath, his eyes soft but steady. "Because even the strongest hearts get lonely," he said gently. Bella nodded slowly, absorbing that. Then she smiled. "Well, not anymore." That moment settled over the room like sunlight breaking through a long gray sky. No one clapped, no one needed to. The silence held its own kind of reverence. Keanu smiled at Bella, but it was a different kind of smile. Quiet, filled with something deeper than pride. Maybe relief, maybe peace. After the circle ended, people lingered longer than usual. Leo stayed behind to show Bella a new theme he was working on for the next short film. Carla brought out an old group photo from the early days and started teasing Ron about his mustache. Grace watched all of it unfold from a distance, arms crossed, a soft grin on her face. She walked over to Keanu, who was now wiping down the coffee station with slow, absent-minded motions. "You okay?" she asked. Keanu nodded. "I didn't think I'd get this far," he said. "There was a point when I thought I'd lost all of you." "You almost did," Grace replied honestly. "But you didn't. Because you stopped hiding." He met her eyes. "I didn't do it for forgiveness." "I know," she said. "That's why it came." Over the next few weeks, the studio settled into its rhythm. Projects resumed, but with a renewed energy. The crew began working on a short film that was close to everyone's hearts, based on their own journey. It was fictionalized, of course, but the themes were clear: fear, failure, family, and finding your way back. Keanu didn't direct it. He didn't act in it either. Instead, he served as a quiet guide, standing behind monitors, offering gentle suggestions, and trusting his team to lead. It was a different kind of leadership, one built not on authority, but on vulnerability. One afternoon, Elijah brought his 5-year-old daughter Zoe to the studio. She wandered curiously from room to room, holding a stuffed giraffe under her arm. When she reached Keanu, she tugged on his sleeve. "Are you the boss?" she asked. Keanu knelt down to her level. "Sometimes, but not always." She studied him seriously, then smiled. "Okay, I like you." He chuckled, ruffled her hair, and watched as she ran back to her dad. Later that day, Keanu sat alone in the editing suite. On the desk was a worn journal, Grace's old, leather-bound notebook, the one she had written in during his absence. She had given it to him a week earlier, saying simply, "If you're ready to read it." He had waited. Until now. As he flipped through the pages, her words unfolded like a story he'd never dared to write about himself. Pages of worry, anger, confusion, love. There were drawings, too. Little sketches of him with his dog, post-it reminders she had wanted to give him, and quotes from movies he never realized had impacted her. One entry caught him by surprise. "I don't think he knows how much he's shaped all of us. We didn't follow him because he was famous. We followed him because he made us feel seen." His eyes welled up again, and this time he didn't try to stop the tears. He had spent a lifetime giving quietly, funding scholarships, visiting sick children, fixing broken things when no one was watching. But this journey, this test, had stripped him of the safety that came with doing good anonymously. It had forced him to face the question he had always avoided. Would people still love him if they saw his cracks? Now he knew the answer was yes. Not because he was perfect, but because he had allowed them in. On the wall across from him, the studio's mission statement had been quietly updated. In small gold letters etched into the wood paneling, it now read, "To tell human stories, with honesty, with heart, and with each other." Keanu stood up, placed the journal gently back on the desk, and stepped out into the hallway. It was late, the sun beginning to set through the skylights. The place was quiet, but he could hear soft music coming from Leo's scoring room and distant laughter echoing from the back kitchen. He walked toward it, no longer alone. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the studio's ambient lights and the occasional rustle of a paper coffee cup. Keanu sat on the worn couch in the corner of the team lounge, a small notebook balanced on his knee. Grace sat beside him, her legs tucked up underneath her, arms crossed but relaxed for the first time in weeks. Around them, the team had gathered: Danny, Carla, Leo, Ron, Natalia, Marisol, and Elijah. Each holding a warm drink, each looking more at peace than they had in months. Keanu flipped open the notebook and stared down at a blank page. His pen hovered for a moment before he began to write, slowly, his hand steady. "Love is not earned," he scribbled. "It's revealed when we dare to be vulnerable." He stared at the sentence, then underlined the words, slowly, deliberately. Across the room, Carla noticed and gave a soft smile. She leaned over to whisper to Marisol, who nodded and gently reached for her phone. Not to film, not to share, but to capture the moment for their private memories. Something sacred had been born out of what started as a lie. Keanu looked up and met their eyes, one by one. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "About who I've been, who I want to be, and what I nearly lost trying to protect myself." Grace gave him a small nod, encouraging him to continue. Elijah leaned forward in his seat, sensing something important was about to be said. "I thought if I let you all believe I was sick, I could see who really cared. But that's not how trust works. That's not how love works. You showed up. You worked through exhaustion. You told me stories I didn't think anyone remembered, and it made me realize something. I never had to be perfect to be loved. I just had to be honest." There was a silence in the room, heavy but warm. Natalia set her mug down and walked over, placing a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "You've always been honest in how you treat people, even if you weren't honest about this one thing." Denny followed, stepping beside her. "You showed up for me when no one else did. I wouldn't have made it this far in my career without you, man." Grace exhaled slowly, her eyes wet. "You made a mistake, but you owned it. And you listened. That's more than most people ever do." Elijah stood, raising his voice slightly. "So what do we do now?" Keanu looked at him, then turned to the others. "We make it matter. We turn all of this, the pain, the lessons, the tears, into something that helps others." He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his notebook and handed it to Grace. It was a proposal. The Vulnerability Fund. A portion of the studio's profits would go toward supporting mental health awareness and therapy access for those working behind the scenes in the industry. Gaffers, editors, caterers, interns, the people no one ever saw. Grace's eyes widened as she read. "You already drafted this." "I had a lot of time to think," Keanu said with a sheepish smile. "I love it," Carla whispered. Elijah clapped his hands once. "Let's do it." They all came together then. No script, no production schedule, no performance. Just arms wrapped around each other, tears wiped without embarrassment, and the warmth of people who had survived something raw and real. As the group began to disperse into smaller conversations, Keanu remained seated. He looked out the studio's high windows at the sunset, golden light pouring across the floor. For the first time in years, he didn't wonder who cared about him. He knew. The following week, the Vulnerability Fund was formally launched. But it wasn't just about the money. Keanu insisted on a deeper commitment. Every new hire would now attend a wellness orientation. Team members could take mental health days without having to explain. And once a month, the studio would host check-in circles where anyone, from assistants to senior producers, could share how they were really doing. The first session was quiet at first. People were shy, unsure. But when Grace spoke about her fear of burning out, and Elijah confessed to nearly quitting last year due to anxiety, something cracked open. What followed was healing. Laughter, tears, connection. It was messy, honest, and human. Keanu didn't speak much that day. He just listened, his hand resting on his knee, head slightly bowed, heart wide open. Afterward, Carla came up to him and said, "You know, all of this, it never would have happened without the lie." He didn't know how to respond, so he just smiled. Later that evening, Keanu returned to his office. It was quiet now, just the sound of distant typing from a late-working editor. He looked around the space, photos of past film sets, scribbled script pages pinned to a corkboard, and in the corner a small white candle flickering beside the memory wall they had built for him. Hundreds of notes, different handwriting styles, some typed, some childlike and misspelled, others poetic and beautifully written, all anonymous, all grateful. He walked to the wall and scanned the entries. "I was a background extra. You gave me your umbrella and stood in the rain instead. I never forgot that. You paid for my sister's heart surgery and never told a soul. When I had no money and my mom passed, you gave me a plane ticket home. I never said thank you. So, thank you." Each note told a story he had almost forgotten. Not because he didn't care, but because he never kept score. That was who he was. And now, standing in front of the memories others refused to let fade, he finally understood something deep in his bones. He had never needed to test their love. It had always been there. Behind him, Grace stepped into the room. She didn't say anything, just walked up beside him, placed a gentle hand on his back, and whispered, "Now you know. You've always been loved." Keanu turned, his eyes misted, and whispered, "Yeah, I do now." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the studio windows, Keanu sat with his notebook open. Slowly he wrote, "Love is not earned. It's revealed when we dare to be vulnerable." Around him, his team gathered, laughing, sharing stories, hugging. No masks, no distance, just truth. They had agreed that a portion of all future profits would go to mental health awareness causes. Keanu closed his notebook, stood, and faced them. There was no doubt left in his heart. He didn't wonder anymore. He knew. He was seen, he was valued, and most of all, he was loved.